Hey everybody, Brett Tadlock, TNArtist. So just wanted to jump in here a little bit and, kind of have a little bit of a talk about playing around. One of the things I highly encourage you to do is pick a subject that's kind of simple, but that gives you some opportunity to play around with different techniques no matter what program you're using. So here I'm using Rebelle 5, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what all I'm doing here in a second, but the main thing with it is, be it Rebelle, ArtRage, Procreate, Photoshop, any of those ones, give yourself a chance to play. And by that I mean pick something, just one thing to work on, and then play around with it. So here what I'm doing in Rebelle is I'm doing a simple fall leaf because I wanted to play around with some of the gradations of colors and letting things blend out. So what I've done here is I just roughly drew out a leaf. I selected it with the selection tool, and then to use that as a mask, so all the edges are protected there with it. And now what I'm doing with the diffusion paused, I'm going in with the watercolor brush, and I just picked one of the standard ones, and you can really use any for here. And I laid out the gradations that I wanted it to change from green to kind of a yellowish green to a yellow to a little bit of a brownish orange to an orange to a red, and just kind of laid that out. I'm doing this on a separate layer above my line drawing that I made, and just kind of filling it in some of the different spaces and giving it a chance to kind of be set up so that I can play around with it. Now I wanted to add in even more pigment here, so that's what I'm doing is I'm kind of laying this in there. I've turned on the diffusion, so you'll notice that it's starting to spread out like a watercolor does, and I wanted to add more vibrant color to that as it was going and take advantage of that pooling effect that I was getting to see, okay, if I do that and I've got some contrasting colors, how does that change it? How does that affect it? What does that do? And so that's where I started playing around with this. And you'll notice that there on the stem there's a little bit of an overbleed where it was starting to bleed in. So I thought, well, what if I add a little bit more pigment to it? Can it push it back out with the way that the engine does? And it started to. Then I took the blend tool and kind of started blending it back and forth to, again, control where that water's going and playing around with it. One of the other things you can do with this is to use the blow tool on there, where you blow air across it and it kind of spiders it out and drips and stuff. So that's another thing to do. Once I got that, then I turned on my tilt and angled it slightly to have it tilting down. And then I went in and I set it to true pigment, which is kind of, you may not have noticed this transition, but it made it a little bit granulated down towards the bottom right green, which is what I wanted. I wanted to have that true pigment look. So these are all the standard watercolor set. And then from there, I wanted to kind of build in more. So I made another layer on top of my drawing. I moved my color layer to the bottom, my rough drawing to the next layer, and then the layer on top of that is where I wanted to ink in some more defined lines that were a little cleaner. So what I'm doing here is on the mixing palette, I'm mixing kind of a brownish, black, greenish color, kind of a ugly puke pea brown kind of color, but anyway. And then I'm going across it and just inking in where I want this to be. And once I've get it inked in how I like it, I'm going to go back and erase some of it to get kind of some sharper points here and there and kind of play around with it. So that's what I'm doing right here, is just kind of inking this in. And then I'll go in and refine it a little bit with the eraser tool, which is one of the great things about doing digital is I can work in layers and kind of push and pull and blend and play around with it. Now, on this layer, I do not have the true pigment stuff turned on because I want to set this layer to multiply. And when you have the pigments layer tool turned on, you can't use any of the layer effects, okay? Because it's trying to give you more of a real world kind of look to it. So on this layer, I have it turned off. And I'll actually duplicate this layer on top of itself and then erase back even more of it, because then it kind of gives me an in and out of darkness, a little bit more of a natural kind of thing. And once I get this kind of where I like it, I'll move it down to what I want, put it on multiply, so it kind of blends in with the colors. And then from there, one of the things I wanted to do next was not only erase it back like I'm doing right here, like I mentioned, but you'll see where I add another layer and I start putting more watercolor on top of it for some splotchy effects and some spatter effects. And kind of playing with that. Again, playing, and that's the key point of this, is just play. Give yourself a chance to look at this. No matter what you're working in, pick one thing that you're trying to play around with. For me, it was the colors, going back and forth and controlling that depth and that feel of it and refamiliarizing myself with some of Rebelle's stuff and some of the new stuff, and just kind of controlling some of the variables by having it focus. So here I'm just working with the spatter brush and brushing in some of that same greenish brown kind of look and splattering that in there. And then once I've got it in there, I turn on the water on the layer, wet it, turn it back off, turn it back on, turn it back off. And what that does is it causes it to spread and stop, and it leaves little kind of lines from where it was spreading. They're very subtle, but they're there, and it's kind of like the same way that a leaf, when it's starting to dry out, it'll have these kind of brittle sections to where eventually that leaf will go away, and it'll kind of do that. So that's what I'm doing here, and then just checking the amount of moisture I still have in the layer, and playing around with that. And then from there, I'm just, again, going back in and adding in some shadows, adding in some different things that I wanted to kind of play around with, roughing up the leaf and kind of get a feel for it. So the rest of this is really just me kind of playing around with some of the stuff and adding in a drop shadow to it, so it looked like it could be sitting off of this paper that is one of the preset paper canvases for Rebelle 5, and just, you know, mixing it around. So if you have Rebelle, again, give yourself one thing to work on instead of like a whole painting. Play around with that, mess around, give yourself the full permission to screw it up, to mess it up, to learn from it, you know, because the important thing with art, or really, you know, really with anything, is fail forward. You know, have a problem, fail at it, learn from it, and keep moving forward, because each time you learn from that mistake or that issue or that problem, you're failing forward. Because, like, you know, Adam Savage in Mythbusters always says that failure is always an option. Absolutely. But we try to make so many perfect things out there that we just don't give ourselves the permission to fail. And so that's what I'm doing right here. I'm giving you the permission to try something, experiment with it, fail with it, learn from it, fail forward, keep moving, do it again. You know, it makes it so much fun, because you don't have to worry about, you know, oh, is this a finished illustration or something? You're not getting paid to this. I'm not getting paid to make a leaf. I'm just doing it because I want to do it. And I wanted to show you guys some of the ways that you can play around and mess around and get some stuff. So what have I done here? Again, I have layers that are set to multiply. I have layers that are set to pigment so that I can't multiply. And I'm kind of blending the two and seeing how that works back and forth. You know, what does it give me? If I airbrush in a shadow, how does that look? If I put another layer of the lines from the veins on the leaf on top of itself and then erase back some of it, how does that look? That kind of stuff. If I invert the selection and airbrush in a shadow around it, how does that look? Is it too digital? Is it digital enough? Is it something that I like? Is it something I don't like? Can I cut a hole out of the leaf and give that kind of a shadowy look too? Again, all of these things are things that you can play around with and do. So for the rest of this, I'm just going to let it play out. And again, I'm just doing the same stuff I've talked about. Leave me any questions, comments, or anything else that you have. And if there's something specific that you want me to go over, I can do that. I have a bunch more stuff on Patreon. If you're not there already, please consider joining. There's hours of content there that you can go over, and just a lot more things that I can show you as well. So I hope you've gotten something out of this. I hope you'll consider subscribing if you're not already. You'll give it a thumbs up if you haven't already, and just enjoy the rest of this and listen to the music and let it play through. Thanks again for watching, everybody.